this is the mood of the mind, isn't it? So what's the mood of the mind? Do you want to be here, not want to be here? Are you troubled by some family issues or physical issues? Do you feel inspired? It doesn't really matter, actually. The knowing accepts all things and lets go of all things. So it's the mood of the mind. And might not be anything special. It's just kind of neutral, ordinary. But if you have a tendency to wake up and you feel tired and then that goes to grumpiness, you don't have to go there. You can just know, oh, tiredness is like this, and be patient. And then it's actually, no, you don't have to create a self around it through thought, do you? That's extra, it's not necessary. And of course that's suffering. So then establish clarity of presence. Always that's the first thing. Right now, how is it? How are you? And then just let that become conscious. And so it's not a kind of inner discussion, oh, I like this, or I like... It's like allowing whatever is to become fully conscious, good, bad, or indifferent. So the mind has a kind of openness, attentiveness, awakeness, but it also has heart. It's sort of allowing life to be as it is. And then from that, you enter into some practice that you like to do. So I like to do the heart, to just go to the heart, bring up gratitude, in breath, out breath. They're a lovely way to start the day. So on the in breath, I think thoughts of gratitude. On the out breath, may all beings be well. And then if you feel sleepy or dull, you can increase the volume of breath, breathe more deeply, enjoy the breath, really open the chest, use the body, straighten the back, open the chest. So it's not just a passive, it's not just passive, it can be active, can't it? It has to be active in attention, but also active in posture. So let's sit quietly then for the term of the meditation. I think in Thai, I don't have the tones right, but arom means know the arom is aramana, know the mood of the mind. I think that's the best translation I have. But what's the mood of the mind? And you can see if you can right away know that rather than be it. There's a huge difference. So like this morning I woke up and I felt tired. And I'm 73, so that's going to happen more and more until I die. And maybe then I'll whatever. But tiredness is tiredness. But what is added to that, right? What do I add to that? Am I unaware and then I just kind of brush my teeth and grumble to myself and then sort of be awake but not awake. Whereas if you train yourself right from the moment you wake up, what's the mood of the mind? You have to make those intentions, don't you? You just keep making those intentions even before you go to sleep. And then what's the mood of the mind? And then right away you're into awareness. And then if the mind is taking that mood and grumbling or complaining or whatever, you don't have to do that. And that's freedom. But the mood is still the mood, but it's not, it doesn't create a sense of self. That's what bhava means. It's kind of becoming something like a person who is grumpy and then inflicting it on everyone else. Or if you're inflicting it on yourself, which is just as bad. And so it's not a question of not feeling grumpy. because it's just, it's just life. Life, you feel tired, but it's becoming something through that, becoming this grumpy person. It's a very good example around what we mean by bhava, this arise. I guess in modern language you'd use egoic consciousness or something like that. I'm not sure, but it becomes very, very apparent. And then if you say, when you awaken, you actually go to like the heart chakra. I had a really interesting insight with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This was in the late 80s. I was on the committee that was hosting him to come to New Zealand for the first time, and he gave a talk in Auckland, and he said, well, he says a lot, but he said that compassion is the method. I said, oh, now, I never thought of that. I thought compassion is the goal. So I had been trained in Theravada Buddhism to very much like the method is like strong concentration. And you're just going to concentrate and attain all these levels, which I didn't know anything about. I just took it on trust. But then I looked around and said, no one seems to be able to do this. No one talks about it, like these achievements, high concentration and so on. But then I look around and I said, well, wait. You guys actually doing this? Who's doing it? And then you hear about some master in, the worlds of back and beyond who can do this. Oh, great, okay. And then Ajahn Chah and Luang Liem. So I thought I'd read Luang Liem's piece later today. But they weren't focusing on concentration. They're focusing on non-grasping, non-attachment, and compassion, kindness in community. Be sensitive, be generous, be responsible, cultivate harmony, cultivate friendliness. All that was the language in my training. And then when His Holiness said, compassion is the method, it's not the goal. It's actually what you do. Now, I can't always be compassionate. I can also feel tired. But then I can open the heart and say, oh, with compassion, I can know tiredness. So I saw that or at least that's the way I operate. I saw that awareness has to have, to me, it needs this heart component of acceptance, and more than acceptance, it's kind of openness. That was a big insight for me, very important. That's how insight sometimes works, isn't it? It's just someone says something and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then those kinds of insights then become the path for years. They can be very, very profound. So now, like this morning, just to wake up first thing, what's the mood of the mind? What's the heart feel like? The mood is tired, which is unpleasant. And then I say, the unpleasant feels this, so I go to the heart. There's no problem. I said, it's all right, right? Get the coffee in there and sort it out. So waking up is part of the craft. Waking up, and you can see that if I do that right from the get-go, right from when I wake up, then I'm much more prepared for breakfast with family or breakfast with Zoom or whoever you're having your breakfast with, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. But wake up and not know, then you just make the next hour more difficult to practice with. It's very practical that way. So with all that in mind, let's finish with the metta chant. I thought I'd read from that book I mentioned of Luang Liem's. Most of you have heard me read it on many retreats, but just the background for those of you who don't know who Luang Liem is. Luang Liem is about 80 years old, and he's been a monk for almost 60 years, Thai monk from the northeast of Thailand, comes from an agricultural family, so very little formal education. But he is the abbot of Wat Pah Pong, which is the monastery that Ajahn Chah started. And before Ajahn Chah fell ill, you know that Ajahn Chah was actually paralyzed paralyzed for 10 years, not able to move his body. Before he came down before he had those strokes or whatever, Luang Liem, he appointed Luang Liem to be the abbot of Wat Pah Pong, which is our home monastery in Thailand, and all the other monasteries throughout the world are sort of emanations of that. And so Luang Liem was the abbot during all that time that Luang Por Chah was incapacitated, and then now he's has his own disciples, and he's very, very much beloved by all of us. He's a very, very interesting monk, but also highly attained. And so in this book called No Worries, which I've asked many of you to read, I'll just read some bits in it and see how that works for us this morning. So the book is called No Worries, and someone just posted a PDF link to it, and this is in the section on his biography. Sound is okay, Vivian? All right. I came to Wat Pah Pong. So Wat Pah Pong again is, Wat means monastery, Pa means forest, and Pong I think means swamp or something. So in Thailand, all the monasteries, our monasteries usually have the prefix Wat Pa, Nanachat, Wat Pa, Nong Pa Pong, and so on. So that's what it means. I came to Wat Pah Pong with a mind that was interested in the training. So I think Luang Liem was a monk now less than a decade, maybe like 8 years he had been a monk, and very much kind of in the study realm of Thai Buddhism, and found that totally unsatisfactory and was fed up with study. And then he found Ajahn Chah, and he said, well, this monk I can trust, and this monk will give me good guidance. He had great faith in Luang Por Chah. I came to Wat Pah Pong with a mind that was interested in the training, practice, and development of myself. I undertook some special practices, all for myself. Again, this was probably 1960, this is 1969. So he would have been in his, 30 years old or something. For example, after the group meditation meetings in the evening, I took the opportunity to put forth some more effort in the practice, trying to develop diligence as a habit. I didn't socialize. I didn't relate to other monks. I didn't speak with anybody. In that rainy season, we were almost 50 altogether. If I remember correctly, 47. I didn't get into contact with anybody, living like somebody who really takes his chance. And the opportunities for practice were fantastic. I was trying to train myself in understanding all the feelings that arise when one is completely left to nature. If we are given a chance like this, we need to try hard and be resolute to use it. But it wasn't always the case that I was very diligent. Sometimes I also felt lazy. Laziness comes up when egotistical feelings take hold of us. What I did to face this was to ask myself constantly, what have I come here to do? And so skip a little bit. And this is the writer of, that's Luang Liem's voice. This is the writer of the book. The rains retreat is a time when the monks of a monastery usually intensify their efforts in practice. Luang Por's high aspirations and motivation led to a powerful experience at the beginning of the rainy season, of which he tells. I experienced something stranger than anything I had ever experienced before. From the beginning of the rains retreat on up to the second month, I felt great saddha, great faith in the practice. There was no decline, no thoughts of discouragement at all in my practice. The practice went well the whole time, although there were a few experiences of the mind getting involved with desires and defilements, but they weren't very strong. So obviously, Luang has a lot of barami, as we say. He's very developed, but he's been working, very hard, just constantly practicing mindfulness, awareness. So then again, the writer of the book, around the middle of the rainy season of the year 1969, Luang Pu, in terms of honorifics, you have Luang Po, you have Ajahn, you have Bhikkhu, you have Luang Po, Luang Pu. And they're not titles, they're honorifics that the Thai people use in a sense of endearment and honor. So Luang Pu is like venerable grandfather, and Luang Po is like venerable father, but it almost has like Luang Po is like grandfather, and Luang Pu is great-great-grandfather. So you have these, and you have to understand the Thai use of honorifics. They have a lot because it's a very endearing language. So they have ways of endearment and respect that they can use in different circumstances. They're not titles. So when people started calling me Luang Po, they thought I had kind of like more pips on my shoulder or something, some kind of insignia or whatever. But no, it's just kind of a term of endearment for an old monk. So around the middle of the rainy season of the year 1969, Luang Pu Cha encouraged the monks to practice with special intensity. They weren't supposed to speak to each other, and the communal morning and evening meetings for chanting and meditation were canceled. Luang Pu Cha saw that it was the time to give the monks more opportunity to do this practice on their own. So Luang Por Liem increased his efforts, and as he did so, results became evident. On the 9th of September, around 10 p.m., he experienced an immense transformation in his mind. He had a feeling of extraordinary brightness and happiness, of which he reports. It is impossible to describe this kind of happiness to someone else. It is impossible to make someone else know and understand it. It isn't the happiness of getting things according to one's wishes, and not the happiness because things are agreeable. It's the kind of happiness that goes beyond these two. Walking is happiness, sitting is happiness, standing is happiness, and lying down is happiness. There is the experience of delight and joy all the time. Furthermore, one is able to uphold the knowledge in one's mind that this happiness arises completely by itself and eventually will vanish by itself. Both sukha and dukkha in an experience like this are still entirely impermanent states. I was able to maintain the knowledge of this fact all the time. In every posture, standing, walking, sitting, and lying down, there was a continuous and equal experience of happiness. The state was the same whether I was doing sitting or walking meditation. If one were to try to describe the mind in this state, one could say there is brightness, but the word bright actually doesn't describe correctly what the experience is like. It's as if there is nothing that can make the mind get involved with anything. This experience lasted for a day and then changed again. Then the mind became utterly peaceful, not at all exhausted, tired, or sleepy, but filled with clarity, radiance, and coolness, imbued with various kinds of delight and rapture. This experience lasted completely without reference to time. It was truly akaliko, timeless. The same feeling continued on through all four postures. Eventually, I asked myself, what is this? And the answer was a mode of the mind. It is like this in itself. When there is happiness, we simply take it as happiness. It is simply a matter of happiness. When there's peace, we simply take it as a matter of peace. And we just look at our happiness on and on. We just look at our peace on and on, unremittingly. So what I take from that is not just the bliss of the experience, but the capacity of awareness. Because I think, when you get an experience which is extraordinary, you get very excited by it and lose awareness maybe and think, well, what have I got and what is that? And then try to repeat and come back to that in a future meditation and maybe feel frustrated. And for me, what's really important in this is that Luang Por is obviously he's practicing awareness unremittingly. And that to me isn't concentration unremittingly. He's not like absorbed. He's very with life. But it's kind of unremitting awareness of anicca dukkha anatta. And to me, that's a kind of better definition of samadhi than right concentration. There's composure, there's focus, all that's going on, but it's not separate from the world, like some kind of absorption into an object where you're not with the world. At least that's how I like to interpret it. You'll have your own way of interpreting it. Eventually, on the evening of the 10th of September, a change to something new that Luang hadn't experienced before took place. A feeling of weariness, frustration, and fatigue took over. Whenever he sat or walked, he felt sleepy. Even after he got up after having rested, the tiredness remained. In each posture, he felt completely exhausted. He got to the point where he fell asleep while he was doing walking meditation and ran into some thorns. His whole face became scratched and sore. And this is Liem in quotes. At least the sleepiness will disappear now, end quote, he thought, but the fatigue continued to remain as strong as before. Still he endured, telling himself that it is natural to face obstacles in the practice, which to some extent everybody needs to pass. With these reflections in mind, he understood that he needed to look at this tiredness that previously hadn't been present. After all, this fatigue just arose, so it was impermanent too. Using this insight, he attempted to maintain awareness of sleepiness. On the 11th, Luang experienced another change, namely a great peace and happiness returned to his mind. In all four postures, there was clarity and gladness. Simply being by himself was very pleasant. Nothing could intrude and stir up his mind. External objects impinging on the mind just couldn't reach it. When working together with the monks and novices during chores, although he was together with others, he felt the same as if alone. He wasn't interested in what they were talking or chatting about. He couldn't be bothered to think about what was happening at all, and when the chores were finished, he simply went back to his hut. The next day passed with the ongoing happiness and peace continuing as if it was a normal and ordinary experience. With unceasing attention. And this is sort of, again, if your vision of Theravada Buddhism is strong concentration and absorption, and you read this, well, he's hauling water. He's with the monks. He's a normal monk in some way. He's not a catatonic, an amateur catatonic. He's with the situation, but unremitting mindfulness, and that might be an interesting way to think of samadhi rather than these ideas of absorption. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I do wonder if they're not a bit misleading. So he's you could say he's very focused, but it's not on an object. It's about presence, it's about awareness, it's about knowing the way things are. But at least that's how I interpret it. He couldn't be bothered to think much about what was happening at all, and when the chores were finished, he simply went back to his hut. The next day passed with the ongoing happiness and peace continuing, as if it was a normal and ordinary experience. With unceasing attention, Luang continued to look at both his mind and the objects of his mind. When the evening of the 12th approached, he started to question himself. Why do we really practice? What's all this practice for? And the answer arose, we don't practice for anything. We practice for the sake of practice. Whatever it will lead to doesn't matter at all. Our duty is to practice, so we practice and try to maintain mindfulness and awareness with it. In each moment, we keep teaching ourselves. Whatever we are doing, we try to have mindfulness and awareness. Whether we are walking to or fro, we keep everything in a state of perfect balance. So doubt arises. What is this for? He doesn't go off into analysis and read a book, right? He's just there. Oh, why do we practice? We practice for the sake of practice. It doesn't get caught in the intellect trying to figure something out, because that would be another condition. Finally, This is all of you know I love this kind of, the understatement of this paragraph. Finally, I felt I had done enough walking meditation for that day because I became quite tired and my feet already hurt very much. The bones of my feet felt like they were piercing through the skin. Here's the line, here's the understatement. As I had been walking the whole day and night without rest. So, I mean, who could do that? An extraordinary human can do that. That he has this resilience and determination to have unremitting mindfulness doing walking meditation all that time. And so then, so as I had been walking the whole day and night without rest, and this is the kind of beautiful understatement, it is normal to experience painful feelings in the body if we overuse a single posture. But it is also normal that feelings change again. So I thought, it's really enough walking meditation for today. I went up to my hut, put on my robe with the right shoulder open and the outer robe folded over the left shoulder, sat down facing east, the same direction as Luang Cha's hut, thought of my teacher, and started meditating. The meditation was very peaceful, and the same reflection as before came up in Luang Por's mind. We don't practice for anything, we practice for the sake of practice. And this is Luang Por again. Keeping this teaching in my mind, I kept on meditating. Normally I would sit meditation until about 10 or 11 p.m. and then stop to have a rest. But on this day I continued sitting for about 8 hours without moving or making the slightest change in posture. And again, I mean, who can do that, right? Who can do that? So it sounds, well, that's not for me, you know. I gotta do the seal posture, and I'm finished after half an hour or something. but if you don't take that incredible part of me that he has, right? Because he's obviously bringing a lot into this lifetime, and he's an amazing person. But if you just take what's he actually doing, unremitting mindfulness and awareness, that we can take from this, right? But he's also like putting a fair bit of effort into doing that a lot, right? So certainly when, you know, young monks read about this, such as me, and then they try to sit without moving, then they usually have arthroscopies afterwards because they do their knees. And so this cannot be done with willfulness. You know, just willfully holding a posture and not moving is not mindfulness. Right? It's still bound by ego. So it's not as straightforward as just not moving. It has to be done with mindfulness. And if you can do that with mindfulness and not hurt yourself, then hats off to you, right? But it doesn't require that. It requires more the understanding of continued unremitting mindfulness and awareness. So keeping this teaching in mind, I kept on meditating and so on. With this experience of peace, the mind changed. The feeling of peacefulness shot up and pervaded throughout the whole body, as if something were taking hold over it. It felt cool, a coolness that suffused the whole body, so very cool, an experience of the whole body becoming completely light and at ease. The head felt so cool the whole day and night, as if there was a fan blowing over it, cool, peaceful, quiet, and still. No experience of thoughts at all. And no clue at all where they had disappeared. Everything silent, completely. It felt totally quiet. The only experience left was that of utter peace and stillness. The body felt tranquil, cool, and light. This experience continued on throughout the whole year, ladies and gentlemen. Right? It wasn't like, you know, an afternoon, but this is even more. This experience continued on throughout the whole year, not just for a day or two. In fact, it has continued unchanging for many years, all from that one go. So then you have someone who has realized the unchanging, the unconditioned peace, the harbor. And in very ordinary language, too. This is what I think we all love about this. It's not technical, that kind of special jargon. It's just ordinary language, but an extraordinary man. So the experience continued on throughout the whole year, not just for a day or two. In fact, it has continued unchanging for many years, all from that one go. There is a state of coolness, as if in the brain, whether sitting or lying down, coolness in every position. All worries, concerns, or similar thoughts from the thinking mind are totally gone. Thinking in this or that direction ceased. All quiet, just like a forest where there isn't the slightest sound of any bird singing. Truly quiet. No wind blowing at all, just ongoing tranquility and peace. It feels as if there are no sankharas. And sankharas, we call these are the compounded or fabrications or made up things. It feels like there are no sankharas, no proliferations of the mind. All the suffering that arises with kilesas that had bothered me before, the kilesas concerning the other sex, or all kinds of ambitions that I had before, I don't know where they all disappeared. Seeing somebody, and this is interesting, seeing somebody, I just had the feeling of seeing it as absolutely normal. To see a person as simply a person, just that much. No beautiful persons, no ugly persons. People simply would be specifically the way they were. This is the kind of peace and tranquility that arose. I don't know what it was, but I also didn't care what it was, always knowing it is like this by itself in just this way. It is like this through peacefulness and tranquility. There isn't anything to be concerned about as far as how various things exist. As concerns dukkha, I don't know what dukkha is like. As concerns laziness, I don't know what laziness is like. Questioning myself about laziness, there wasn't any. Questioning myself about dukkha, there wasn't any. The feeling inside my heart was exactly like this. I tried to recall and pin down that which is called dukkha. What is it? I really don't know. I only know how they discern the meaning in terms of conventional language, because dukkha is just something created by common conventions. When the mind has no dukkha, all conventions whatsoever don't exist in the mind. And the experience of this feeling has lasted on continuously all the time since then. There has been no change at all the way up to the present day. The same state still lasts on and has been stable, continuous, and without changes. Oh, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So, now, just to give you the context, Luang Liem is the abbot of our biggest monastery. There's probably 60 monks there, and every year on the 16th of January, I don't know what's going to happen this year, but there's a large gathering, and it's been, which commemorates the passing of Luang Cha, and it's a 4-day event, and over those 4 days, 20 to 30,000 people invade the monastery. And on the ultimate day, there's a circumambulation around Luang Cha's stupa. And when I was there were, I think, 1,200 monks. I don't know how many nuns there were. There may be several hundred nuns. Maybe 5,000-10,000 lay people. Place is just packed out. And then 2 days later, I went to see Luang Liem, and he said, "How was that? How was the gathering?" He said, "Oh, that was just about the right size." So it's like, it's not, he's not at all disengaged with life. He's fully with life. And he's totally unbothered by it. And brilliant at what he does. He still climbs scaffolding and does cement work, and so and many people who don't know him, when they see him sweeping leaves, they think he's a janitor or something. So he'll be sweeping leaves, and people say, "Where's the abbot stay?" And he points to his kuti. He stays over there, and he keeps sweeping the leaves. So it's just a very, very interesting man. He's very quiet, very, very quiet. So now, what does that kind of story do for your consciousness? Well, certainly it kind of portrays the awe of this being called the Buddha, I think, because then you have a, you have a real life example of this possibility. And hopefully when one recites Namo Tassa, one gets that sense of, well, this is an amazing being. This was an amazing being. That we have the good fortune to still hear his echoes, as it were. And that to me is an optimism, isn't it? It's like, it's a really optimistic teaching as a possibility. And then how do you do that? Well, we're not that gifted as Luang Liem. So Luang Cha would say to a lot of Western monks, he said, you want to get enlightened overnight, but you're not the Buddha. That's not who you are. You have to build barami. You have to be patient. You have to build up reserves of patience and kindness and conviviality and focus and composure. And you have to work. So it was always couched in that reasonable way. And then you see someone like Luang Liem, and you realize, oh, he's really advanced. This man has so many gifts that I don't have. But what is he saying to me? He's saying, unremitting mindfulness and awareness. I can do that, or a bit. I can approach that. He's not asking me to get all those states of mind that he's experiencing. I can work with that, and he can inspire me in that way. So the possibilities that these beings realize are very profound, very, very profound. And yet he questions himself. He says, why do we practice? We practice for the sake of practice. I can, that's not esoteric at all. That's very, very relevant in my own life. So anyway, those of you who have done retreats with me, this must be the 20th time you've heard that. But it's always inspiring, isn't it? I find it is. It's always inspiring, uplifting. Stories are good that way. But the fact that the funeral and death wasn't hidden, nothing to hide really, and that everyone constantly saw that. So there might be several cremations in the monastery a year, and it was, you'd see, like, just to see the first time to see a body burning is it's very powerful, isn't it? Isn't it, right? Like you did it yesterday. Rhetorical question. But it was. It really was. And those kinds of meditations called Subha meditations, they are the meditations on the unbeautiful. And they're not a rejection of the beautiful, but they're a kind of sobering around the beautiful, a kind of, because like we were also invited by doctors in Bangkok, in Siriraj Hospital, to go to see autopsies. I've never done that in the West because I think people would think we're ghouls, so we've thought we don't need bad press. But in Thailand, it was quite respected that monks would go and contemplate and look at a corpse or a dead body and contemplate that. And it's very powerful, you can imagine, right? And in the beginning, it's repulsive, the smells and the visual forms. But then as one gets past the repulsiveness of it and just holds attention on, well, this is the way it is. With birth, there is this. And then the mind has actually quite a lot of peace. It's quite fascinating. Like one of the first autopsies I saw, obviously the body was not dressed, but the doctor said he was a monk. And I said, okay. I'm 40 years old, and they basically took the scalpel and cut it in, just took his face off. Ooh. They had a hacksaw, and they cut the skull open and popped that off, and they took the brain out to look at it. And it sounds like, unless you're a med student, maybe that's normal. It certainly wasn't normal for me, but just kind of getting past the repulsiveness and say, well, this is ordinary. This is what the body is. It's like that. And then I asked the doctor, what did he die of? He said, well, he had a stroke. He probably thought too much, which scared me. I think the doctor kind of was playing with me, but it was like, like the doctor was sort of being a guy and being friendly, but here it was. And we don't get those kind of contemplations much in this culture, because everything is sort of, like even the corpses looks more beautiful than when it died. It's true, I know, I've seen. Which is a way of maybe trying to help a family grieve, but does it really help? I don't know. Or like, I haven't been to many burials, but the few burials I've been to, last one was many years ago, but to alleviate the shock of the bare earth, the morticians put in a bed of artificial grass in the hole, so that you wouldn't think bad things or what. It was really kind of as sanitized as you could get, and which is it's kind of understandable, but it's expensive, first of all. But also, it doesn't miss an opportunity, doesn't it? That this is normal, this is ordinary, and those contemplations on death, they're not meant to make you depressed. If they make you depressed, then don't do them. But I found that, like, coming out of the hospital at Siriraj, and then I'd be in the marketplace, I had to get to a bus or something, and it was very active, and I was a very young monk, and so lots of young Thai women there, and so it's really, a lot of eye contact. And I've just been in a monastery a long time, but the mind had a lot of coolness, because now it had seen the other side rather than just the attractive side. That was quite interesting. I personally have not done a lot of Asubha meditations, because I found that I tend to always be kind of negative and cynical and depressed anyway. So I found it was dangerous for me to take that particular route. But Luang Liem's, if you do read that, no worries, he was really contemplating death as an antidote to all the excitement and activity in his own mind. So he was using a skeleton. So when you read those, if you come across those meditations, you have to understand what they're about. Or even like you have these meditations on the foulness of the body, and they really sound like it's over the top, like you got a problem with the body or something. But the point of it is not a rejection of the body, because you could say, well, the body's actually quite amazing, isn't it? This thing that functions. It's not so much that, it's the mind which is in that which is unsatisfactory, it's looking for satisfaction. So the overemphasis on beauty or things like that, it's trying to cool the mind. So there's kind of cooling practice. So if you come across those, realize what they're for, and be careful not to misinterpret them as some kind of aesthetic rejection of life, or that the monks are hung up on bodies or something like that, or they're ghouls or something. It's not that. But anyway, I've not developed those very much. So I've, as you know, I've worked more with the heart. So maybe I could get to one of these questions. Could I speak to the challenge of coping with and preventing empathetic distress? I never heard. Anyway, when the lives of so many people in the world are in turmoil and nurture is under stress. So I'm not, that's not the kind of, I'm not familiar with that language, but I can understand it. Well, like, I know two doctors whose careers were at least 20 years in emerge, and I asked them, how could you do that? I couldn't possibly do that. I just burned out within 2 hours, I think. So there's some, and they really thrived in those emergency situations as doctors. So there's that kind of capacity and skill and gift to be on the front lines, as they say. I've only met one person who works in Ottawa and has been in the COVID wards, and he's a nurse, and he was telling me his stress came partially just from wearing that equipment he said an 8 or 9 hour shift. He was just sweating all the time and hardly, very hard to breathe. So he said it was just absolutely exhausting. So those are situations of stress which are, they're situational and they're professional, and so we have hopefully professionals who can help with that and deal with that. So I don't know about that side of it. I'm very naive, and I know that I don't have the gifts to do. I could take care of my mom, but she was fun to take care of. That's much different. So that I can't speak to. But the distress that people feel in witnessing suffering, that we can maybe think about, that's different, right? So let's sit quietly for the 45 minutes and then you have a Dhamma talk. Just reviewing some of the same things I said often, hopefully. The establishment of presence, knowing what's going on, so using sound, listening, and this is a very important point of not listening for something, but allowing sound to come to you. And then you get the sense of still knowing. And then to help with that tendency to try to control all the time, the sense of affection or kindness. So go to your heart, go to the chest, welcome in someone, the image, the name, or someone who's dear to you. And just feel how when you think of someone who's dear to you, the heart opens. It's not like nothing extraordinary, but it's quite beautiful. And then let that sense of kindness imbue your awareness practice. So, as you know, I was using Luang Samedo, so on the in-breath, Luang, may you be well. And that quickly takes me to gratitude and affection. And it's not about him, it's about the heart being open. The memory is the avenue. So you have still knowing, open-hearted affection, knowing. So it's a very relaxed and happy thing, actually, not controlled and forced and overly focused. And then if you want grounding in the breath, so I was suggesting the end of the out-breath. It's a lovely place to hang out. Still knowing, kindness, that's the balance, and then right through to the end of the out-breath. And then if the mind feels settled and you're at ease, mind's not too busy, then you open the mind to space, choiceless awareness, if you want. So it's your exploration, you use what works for you. In the end, we're coming to that beautiful phrase Luang gives us. It's like this. Good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. Get a good walk outside. I went down to the lake. Oh, beautiful, Pike Lake, very beautiful. So this evening, as I was mentioning earlier today, Venerable Amarasiri's auntie, one of, she died, 5 siblings, and one of the siblings is, of course, Amarasiri's mom, and he was on a Zoom session with the whole family. So there were the 4 sisters, the 1 brother, and 15 cousins. So it was quite an emotional but beautiful sharing. And they've already cremated the body. In India, quite often these things are done very quickly, and they spread the ashes in the sea. So that was all within 12 hours. So Venerable Amarasiri can't join us because he's basically quite exhausted. But we'll do our what we call Matika chanting, and this is traditional in Theravada Buddhism. Comes from the Abhidhamma, and in a Buddhist culture, the family would say, a good example is at Wat Nanachat, which is the Western monastery in northeast Thailand, near Ajahn Chah's monastery, Wat Pah Pong. They have a funeral, a place where you can have an open pyre burning, and basically it's 2 brick walls and steps going up to it, and the brick walls are maybe 4 foot high, and they pile the wood in between those 2 walls, and then the body's placed in usually either wrapped in a shroud or in a very light box, coffin, placed on the wood, and then the wood's lit by someone in the family, and then the whole village. I was there, the last time I saw that was like 5 years ago when I was there, and the whole village, there were 200 people. This was an elder in the local village in Bung Wai, and then people are there to watch the burning, the cremation. And then the monks usually stay on, and the villagers might leave after an hour, and then it takes usually all night, really. And the monks use that for contemplations. It's obviously very powerful. So in that context, and the monks will do this chanting. Here, obviously, we're not allowed to do open cremations. We've talked about it. But so we use a crematorium, but we still do the same chanting in a chapel or somewhere. So it's very traditional. And the chanting itself is actually very, very intellectual. It's not actually emotional. It's a Matika chant. Matika means matrices or lists, and it basically describes all the different forms of experience and mindsets that a human being might experience in a lifetime. And it's chanted in this very kind of monotone way. It's almost like I was talking with Amarasiri about that. It's almost like it's a spreadsheet, because he's an accountant. It's a spreadsheet of different types of mindsets which human beings can, or a taxonomy maybe a taxonomy would be better, something like that. So it's not like emotive of like a soul going to heaven. It's not that at all. It's because in Buddhism we would think that whatever karma the person has been engaged in, the energy of that is what conditions consciousness into the future. So it's not really up to us to somehow make that worse or better. So all beings are born of their karma, heir to their karma. Whatever they shall do, for good or for ill, of that they will be the heirs. And Venerable Amarasiri was telling me a story that Goenkaji used to give about someone coming to the Buddha and saying, "Can you please pray for my father's soul? He's died. He's moved on." And the Buddha said, will you get me a jar, a clay earthen jar, big one, fill it half with stones and half with ghee. So the guy got this and said, now take it out to the river and break it. So takes it out to the river, breaks it, and then watches it, and then the Buddha says, so what happened? He said, well, the stones fell and the ghee rose to the surface. And he said, yeah, that's what happened to your dad. It's not my business. So the light things, the beautiful things or whatever, the wholesome karma, rose to the surface and the heavy stones fell to the depths. So the Buddha was always teaching that we are we're responsible for what happens to us in any kind of other consciousness that might exist. It was a nice story. I hadn't heard that before. It's from the suttas, apparently. So our chanting is more really about a reflection on the naturalness that with birth there's death. And then the realization of that there's peace, that this is a natural phenomenon. Dying is natural, birth is natural. But in a culture where one has heard that again and again and again, like in village culture where every year a few people die, and everyone is a part of that ceremony, either in someone's home or at the monastery, this chant has been heard many times. So it also has a very, in that culture, a very soothing quality, because it's like everything's being done correctly, being done right, and death is natural. And this is what the monks will always be teaching about, that with birth there is death, and that kind of reflection. So we shall do this chanting. So rather than doing the iti piso chanting, we'll do this, and then we'll just sit quietly. We'll just carry on and meditate, okay? So if you just listen, and then continue. So the dedication for this chanting today is Vasa's wife Priya died December 2019, so that Vasa must be very close to your heart. And we'll dedicate the chanting to her. And then Venerable Amarasiri's mom, auntie, was known as Durga Krishnan. So we'll think of her as well and do the chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Kusala dhamma akusala dhamma apayakata dhamma sukhaya vedanaya sampayutta dhamma dukkaya vedanaya sampayutta dhamma adukkama sukhaya vedanaya sampayutta dhamma vipaka dhamma dhamma neva vipaka na vipaka dhamma upadin upadaniya dhamma anupadin upadaniya dhamma anupadin anupadaniya dhamma sankilita sankilesika dhamma asankilita sankilesika dhamma asankilita sankilesika dhamma savitaka savichara dhamma Havitaka vichara matha dhamma Havitaka vichara dhamma piti สหกตาธัมมาสุขสหกตาธัมมาอุเบกขาสหกตาธัมมาทัสสะเนนะปะหาตาธัมมาภาวนายปะหาตาธัมมาเนวทัสสะเนนะภาวนายปะหาตาธัมมาทัสสะเนนะภะหาตาปะหิทุกาธัมมาภาวนายปะหาตาปะหิทุกาธัมมาเนวทัสสะเนนะภาวนายปะหาตาปะหิทุกาธัมมาอัจฉริกามิโนธัมมาอัปปัจจยกามิโนธัมมาเนวัจจยกามิโนนาปัจจยกามิโนธัมมาเสกาธัมมาอาเสกาธัมมาเนวเสกานาเสกาธัมมาปริตตาธัมมามหากตาธัมมาอัปปมานาธัมมาปริตตารามนาธัมมามหากตารามนาธัมมาอัปปมานา รามนาธัมมาหินาธัมมามัชฌิมาธัมมาปานิตาธัมมามิจฉาตนิยตาธัมมาสัมมาตนิยตาธัมมาอนิยตาธัมมามาการัมมนาธัมมามาฆะเหตุกาธัมมามาฆาติปติโนธัมมาอุปานาธัมมาอนุปานาธัมมาอุปาทิโนธัมมาอธิตาธัมมาอนาคตาธัมมาภาจุภานาธัมมาอธิตารามนาธัมมาอนาคตารามนาธัมมาภาจุภานารามนาธัมมาอาชาตาธัมมาปหิตาธัมมาอาชาตาปหิตาธัมมาอาชาตารามนาธัมมาปหิตารามนาธัมมาอาชาตาปหิตารามนาธัมมาสานิทัสสนะสัพพติกาธัมมาอานิทัสสนะสัพพติกาธัมมาอานิทัสสนะปฏิกาธัมมาเหตุปัจเจโยอารามณปัจเจโยอธิปติปัจเจโยอนันตระปัจเจโยสัมมนันตระปัจเจโยสหัจจตปัจเจโยอัญญมัญญปัจเจโยนิสสยปัจเจโยอุปนิสสยปัจเจโยปุเรชาตปัจเจโยปัจจจตปัจเจโยอาเสวนปัจเจโยคัมมปัจเจโยวิปากปัจเจโยอาหารปัจเจโยอินทรียปัจเจโยญาณปัจเจโยมรรคปัจเจโยสัมปยุตตปัจเจโยวิปยุตตปัจเจโย Ati pacayo nati pacayo vigata pacayo avigata pacayo avijja pacaya sankara sankara pacaya vinyanam vinyana pacaya namarupa namarupa pacaya salayatana salayatana pacaya paso pasa pacaya vedana vedana pacaya tanha tanha pacaya upadana upadana pacaya bhava bhava pacaya jati jati pacaya jara maranang soka parideva dukkha manasupaya sambhavanti evameta sakevala sadukkha kanta samudayo oti avijjayata veva asesa viraga nirodho sankhara nirodho sankhara nirodha vedana nirodho vinyana nirodha namarupa nirodho namarupa nirodha salayatana nirodho salayatana nirodha phasa nirodho phasa nirodha vedana nirodho vedana nirodha tanha nirodho tanha nirodha upadana nirodho upadana nirodha bhava nirodho bhava nirodha jati nirodho jati nirodha jara marana soka parideva dukkha domana supaya nirochanti eva metassa kevalassa dukkha kantassa nirodho hoti. Anicavata sankara upadavaya dhamino upachito aniruchanti te sangupasamo sukho anicavata sankara upadavaya dhamino upachito aniruchanti te sangupasamo sukho anicavata sankara upadavaya dhamino upachitava niruchanti te sangupasamo sukho. Good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. Get a good walk outside. I went down to the lake. Oh, beautiful. Pike Lake, very beautiful. So this evening, as I was mentioning earlier today, Venerable Amarasiri's auntie, one of, she died, 5 siblings, and one of the siblings is, of course, Amarasiri's mom, and he was on a Zoom session with the whole family. So there were the 4 sisters, the 1 brother, and 15 cousins. So it was quite an emotional but beautiful sharing. And they have, they've already cremated the body. In India, quite often these things are done very quickly, and they spread the ashes in the sea. So that was all within 12 hours. So Venerable Amarasiri can't join us because he's basically quite exhausted. But we'll do our what we call Matika chanting, and this is traditional in Theravada Buddhism. Comes from the Abhidhamma, and in a Buddhist culture, the family would say, a good example is at Wat Nanachat, which is the Western monastery in northeast Thailand, near Ajahn Chah's monastery, Wat Pah Pong. They have a funeral, a place where you can have an open pyre burning, and basically it's 2 brick walls and steps going up to it, and the brick walls are maybe 4 foot high, and they pile the wood in between those 2 walls, and then the body's placed in usually either wrapped in a shroud or in a very light box, coffin, placed on the wood, and then the wood's lit by someone in the family, and then the whole village. I was there, the last time I saw that was like 5 years ago when I was there, and the whole village, there were 200 people. This was an elder in the local village in Bung Wai, and then people are there to watch the burning, the cremation, and then the monks usually stay on, and the villagers might leave after an hour, and then it takes usually all night really, and the monks use that for contemplations. It's obviously very powerful. So in that context, and the monks will do this chanting. Here, obviously, we're not allowed to do open cremations. We've talked about it, but so we use a crematorium, but we still do the same chanting in a chapel or somewhere. So it's very traditional, and the chanting itself is actually very, very intellectual. It's not actually emotional. It's a Matika chant. Matika means matrices or lists, and it basically describes all the different forms of experience and mindsets that a human being might experience in a lifetime. And it's chanted in this very kind of monotone way. It's almost like I was talking with Amar Siri about that. It's almost like it's a spreadsheet, because he's an accountant. It's a spreadsheet of different types of mindsets which human beings can, or a taxonomy maybe a taxonomy would be better, something like that. So it's not like emotive of like a soul going to heaven. It's not that at all. It's because in Buddhism we would think that whatever karma the person has been engaged in, the energy of that is what conditions consciousness into the future. So it's not really up to us to somehow make that worse or better. So all beings are born of their karma, heir to their karma. Whatever they shall do, for good or for ill, of that they will be the heirs. And Venerable Amarsi was telling me a story that Goenkaji used to give about someone coming to the Buddha and saying, "Can you please pray for my father's soul? He's died. He's moved on." And the Buddha said, "Will you get me a jar, a clay earthen jar, big one, fill it half with stones and half with ghee." So the guy got this and said, "Now take it out to the river and break it." So takes it out to the river, breaks it, and then watches it. And then the Buddha says, "So what happened?" He said, "Well, the stones fell and the ghee rose to the surface." And he said, "Yeah, that's what happened to your dad. It's not my business." So the light things, the beautiful things or whatever, the wholesome karma rose to the surface and the heavy stones fell to the depths. So the Buddha was always teaching that we are we're responsible for what happens to us in any kind of other consciousness that might exist. It was a nice story. I hadn't heard that before. It's from the suttas, apparently. So our chanting is more really about a reflection on the naturalness that with birth there's death, And then the realization of that, there's peace, that this is a natural phenomenon. Dying is natural, birth is natural. But in a culture where one has heard that again and again and again, like in village culture, where every year a few people die, and everyone is a part of that ceremony, either in someone's home or at the monastery. This chant has been heard many times. So it also has a very, in that culture, a very soothing quality, because it's like everything's being done correctly, being done right, and death is natural. And this is what the monks will always be teaching about, that with birth there is death, and that kind of reflection. So we shall do this chanting. So rather than doing the iti piso chanting, we'll do this, and then we'll just sit quietly. We'll just carry on and meditate, okay? So if you just listen, and then continue. So the dedication for this chanting today is Vasa's wife Priya died December 2019, so that Vasa, that must be very close to your heart. We'll dedicate the chanting to her. And then Venerable Amarasiri's mom, auntie, was known as Durga Krishnan. So we'll think of her as well and do the chanting. I know two doctors whose careers were at least 20 years in Emerge, and I asked them, how could you do that? I couldn't possibly do that. I just burned out within 2 hours, I think. So there's some, and they really thrived in those emergency situations as doctors. So there's that kind of capacity and skill and gift to be on the front lines, as they say. I've only met one person who works in Ottawa and has been in the COVID wards, and he's a nurse, and he was telling me his stress came partially just from wearing that equipment. He said an 8 or 9 hour shift, he was just sweating all the time and hardly, very hard to breathe. So he said it was just absolutely exhausting. So those are situations of stress which they're situational and they're professional, and so we have hopefully professionals who can help with that and deal with that. So I don't know about that side of it. I'm very naive, and I know that I don't have the gifts I could take care of my mom, but she was fun to take care of. That's much, much different. So that I can't speak to. But the distress that people feel in witnessing suffering, that we can maybe think about, that's different, right? So if my situation is not physically stressful, in other words, I'm not on the front lines, and I'm getting empathetic distress because I'm experiencing the suffering of others, where's the problem there? Because physically, actually, I'm okay. I'm not in the hospital. So, what's happening? So let's say, let's say there's a family member that is close to you and starting to do things which are self-destructive. And they're really not interested in your viewpoint, but they're very close to you. So you have empathy for them, obviously, but it's very hard to be at peace with that. And why is it hard to be at peace with that? Because you don't want that. I know where this is going. It's going into a brick wall, and the person does not listen, and they're determined to self-destruct for some reasons, because whatever, and here I am, I'm a parent, or I'm a partner, or whatever it is, and I have the empathy, but I'm really, really stressed out. And that stress, I don't think it's not from empathy, it's from wanting. Right? Because it's the empathy, I don't think empathy is actually stressful. But it's the wanting of people not to suffer that, to me, seems to be the stressful part. At least that's what I experienced with my mom. The empathy was always actually very beautiful. but not wanting her to have pain, that was stressful and reactive and so on. And yet I couldn't. I did as much as I could, but she had to have her own suffering. She had to work it through. So that's one thing, though. The Buddha says, you pick up your own karma and work with it, but to pick up someone else's karma, they have to work with it. You can't do that. So empathy doesn't, to me, imply, well, it can. If I take empathy wrongly, then I think I have to fix this, or I don't want this to happen, and I wish the world wasn't like this on a larger scale, and that is stressful because that's coming from wanting. Now, that doesn't mean that having empathy that I don't act when I can act as much as I can, and empathy will always be that way. That's the active force in our hearts. So empathy will always be active when it can. But what about those situations where it can't do anything? Is that where is the stress in that? Well, part of it maybe is because we kind of go into that so much that we become that's not our business in some way. We're picking up something that's not really because we can't do anything about it. And part of it maybe is like media overload. So if someone is distressed about refugees coming across the Med, or people in Sudan, or racial discriminations, or violence towards women, or the whole thing. If I keep watching that, and then I not only feel, oh, those poor people, I say it shouldn't be that way. Do that all day, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get messed up. So what's the point of that? There's a kind of, I would say there's a kind of voyeurism in our society, where we witness to the stress of others, and then we're appalled and shocked, and then we witness it again. Now that to me seems there's something kind of, that's not right. And how is that going to be helpful? If if my local school board is doing something that's going to affect my kids, I get out there and I talk to the teachers, and I can get engaged with social issues. But on a larger scale, how helpful is that? So one has to just judge, first of all, in terms of like closer relationships, I would say it's the desire not to have your loved one suffer. And so when we talk about the open heart, we also talk about upekkha, peaceful coexistence with the way things are. And these, the Brahma Viharas are, again, just to remind you, metta is a sense of goodwill to all beings. Karuna is a sense of compassion to all beings. And karuna is that which activates action and sees the suffering of others. Mudita is the appreciation of beauty and the joyous part. And then upekkha is the peaceful coexistence with the whole business. Sometimes it's translated as equanimity, but it's always, like I was saying earlier in this retreat, it's always of a peace, because the heart's open. So without, I think they call it the near enemy of, no, the far enemy of compassion is burnout, and the near enemy is cruelty, something like that. So, if the heart is open but it's getting stressed out, then that one has to contemplate what does it mean to be at peace with the way things are. And when you say that to people, you got to do something. I'm doing everything I can. And then you realize that the person doesn't want this to be. I found that, like when I first, when I was asked to talk to people about their suffering, and this was a young monk in Chithurst, and I remember I'd get very, very stressed out because I thought I had to fix their problem. So the empathy was there, but I was just doing the wrong thing. It wasn't my problem, which doesn't mean that I didn't do everything I could. But then I picked it up and I took it back to my kuti. And then I distressed myself. And it seemed like a good thing, but it wasn't, because it was totally unhelpful. And then of course another person would come there and I started to hate everyone. Not quite. But I just didn't understand how to do that. Okay, how do I do that? And then Ajahn Viradhammo helped me, and I began to see, well, I can be fully empathetic and do the best I can, and then not worry about it. It's not indifference, is it? It's not indifference. It's being, saying, well, the world is this way. There is injustice, and there is cruelty, and there are refugees, and I'm doing the best I can. So you look at, and when it gets really close, say like if a grandmother has a child and the child is raising the grandchild in a way which the grandmother might think is, leading to bad results, that's very stressful, because you don't want the little innocent, delicate thing to be in trouble and hurt, and yet maybe the grandmother has no power, no possibility, and that's very painful. That's very painful, and you have to go to the pain. And I can't do. Life is like this. So quite often the movement towards peaceful coexistence with the way things are is the ability to feel this kind of crushing of the heart when someone you love, you can't fix it. You can't fix it. Again, the only place I know how to deal with that is in my own heart. And I found that with my mother, and again, it wasn't extreme, but like when my mom took a lot of painkillers. She was really seriously into OxyContin. So I would always kind of dole it out in the ways the doctor prescribed, but even then she had kind of arthritic pain. And I would always know when she was in pain, she'd be very, very quiet. And then we had this negotiation, like she tried to be cheerful so that I wouldn't suffer, and I tried not to worry so that she wouldn't worry that I was, two loving people trying to deal with this very human situation. But then I contemplated. I said, what is the problem here? You're doing everything you can, and your mom's not complaining. She's a very brave woman. What's the problem? I don't want her to suffer, obviously. And then, but she has to suffer. This is her body. This is her karma. She has to go through. And again, she wasn't complaining, and everything was being done. That was a very good insight around what equanimity actually means when the heart is open. And that proved I was a much better caregiver then. She saw that then she could express her concern about her pain and not hold it back, because she thought I would get upset about it. So it became much, much better and less tired. That's pretty easy, really, compared to what some things have. Sometimes people come to me and the kids might be addicted to OxyContin or something like that, or there's all kinds of. So those really, because I don't have kids, I don't experience some of the fears and worries that parents. I could empathize with that, but I can't imagine how difficult it could be. The fear of the hurt your child might face. But what to do? Well, I think you have to look at the wanting of it to be different than it is. You can't fix it. Sometimes you can't fix it. And if you come, well, what do I want that I don't have? What do I have that I don't want? You come to the Four Noble Truths. What the Four Noble Truths is saying. The cause of suffering is attachment to desire. And obviously, I want my loved ones to be free from suffering. I'm not saying that. But it's that existential holding of a hope that is hopeless, maybe. And yet you do everything you can. And the more I find, if I go right to that, then it's painful. I might be crying or whatever, but then it does come to a peaceful coexistence with the way things are. And then if it's a kind of larger issue of like the horror of the world's different sufferings, then just be careful. Again, one of the things we are asked to consider as monks is very seriously is indriya samvara, the restraint of the senses. And so if looking at political arguments or cultural things or refugee things or environmental things, how much of that do you want to take on board as much as you need to function, but how much of it is just this overstimulation of horrible things which are real? So that you have to look at too, like to do what you can, but to guard the mind, which isn't like Pollyannish, it's not like, how lovely the world is. And you realize that, you already know that, but you protect the mind, because it is important to participate in beauty too. Beauty has this very important effect on our minds, and if you have access to beauty, then goodness me, why not also participate in that, right? You don't want to just participate in the horror, and none of us are we're not cold, indifferent people. Anyone who's doing this retreat, we're very compassionate and caring, so that's usually not the problem. It's the kind of over-caring. So contemplate also that you can get attached to beauty. So I could get attached to this beautiful monastery, and when I have to go to the city, it's all so polluted, terrible. But that's something I'm creating. But I could use beauty, the sky, the blue, the green, the bird sound. I could use it to uplift my mind and come to a sense of joy, which is a part of the open heart too, isn't it? And then also be empathetic. But in the whole picture, just, life is like this. And it's interesting that the Buddha's take on it all was from what it's a kind of self-allegorical story where he goes, as you've all heard, he goes into the village and he sees old age, sickness and death for the first time, old people and sick people and death. And so his take on it wasn't to be a healer in a physical sense. He didn't do a kind of Lazarus thing or heal thousands of people. That wasn't his brief. That wasn't his project. His project was more, is there a spiritual dimension that isn't subject to old age, sickness and death? And so in that self-allegorical tale we hear, the four heavenly messengers, as you know, are an old person, heavenly messengers, a sick person, a corpse, and the fourth one is a sadhu. And he asks the charioteer, Chana, so who's that guy? And Chana says, that's a sadhu. He's seeking the deathless, the unconditioned. And the Buddha says, that's the way out. That's the way out, yeah. And that becomes his search. And the idea is, and this search was for all sentient beings. And you can see what effect like one being, like the Buddha had on many, many cultures over 2,600 years. And now here in the Tay Valley. So it's not weak or ineffective, this aspiration that we're involved in. Or then you see like Amaravati in England, how many people it affects, or the Dalai Lama, these kinds of beings. So it's not a weak thing. It actually takes a lot of strength. So where does empathy become burnout? That's a good question. You have to. So next time, for the person who asked that question, next time you're distressed by something that you're looking at, well, why am I so distressed? And logically, say, well, it's terrible. Yeah. But terrible feels this way. So when I looked at the corpse in the autopsy, it was a shock. And then I'd say, but that's what shock feels like. What's really going on? And then, so the Buddhist reflection was, he saw that all around him. He said, yeah. And so he was impelled not towards compassion, distress. He was compelled to spiritual search. This horribleness that people are suffering goes on and 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 on. Is there a way out? So he was impelled from his own compassion, I think, because he shared that, to actually understand the spiritual dimension. So that was that contemplation of the tragedy of life compelled him, didn't make him depressed. It compelled him to really practice hard and realize something. It's an interesting, different way to approach it. But these things are real, like not to dismiss it. Then the investigation is like, okay, why? Rather than, there's so much horror in the world. There's always been horror, not to dismiss it. You imagine the time when they didn't have anesthesia? Civil War in America? Oh, just think of that. How many, just the thought of that. So if I really thought about it, I'd be very upset about that. So there's always been horror and tribulation, as they say. But what can we do? And how can we protect our minds from too much of that information, but also serve from a heart of compassion? And the sensationalization of horror, that's also problematic, isn't it? Where the suffering of others is good sales. That's horrible, isn't it? You think about that. How many, you think BBC's doing a headline on us doing this retreat? Right? 70 meditators. Grannies, a lot of them, sat and meditated for 45 minutes without moving. So please elaborate on anatta. Anatta is a very difficult part of the teaching. And, okay, trick question again. You ready? The Buddha taught there is no self. True or false? Someone's shaking their head. It's false. You're right. He didn't teach that there's no self. He said anything that begins and ends and is contingent, is dependently originated, there's no essence in it. There's no personality. There's no soul in it. All right? Did he teach there is a self? Yes or no? He didn't teach that either. He thought there is suffering, the cause of suffering, and its end. And the teaching on anatta is to challenge the view that I am this body, or these emotions, that I own this, that I have control, that this is my family and I have control over it, etc., all the self-identities that we have. He said, that's a losing game. That perception is not going to get you there. So, well, what do you mean? I am this body. Well, yeah, okay, are you this body? So you start to inquire. What is the body? And if you practice bodily sensation in awareness, you won't find, you'll find consciousness, you find changing sensations in consciousness, but will you find an entity? Is there a body and there's this thing called a me experiencing the body? We might say it's consciousness, but then is that a thing? No, it's just consciousness. And if you really investigate your assumptions of self, then you'll see that it keeps falling away. It keeps falling away. But it's not a philosophical position. That's not its idea. The idea is that you actually take a look at the assumption that I am a good person or a bad person, or I am a man, say. Well, of course you're a man. You're an old man, but you're still a man. But yeah, there is manhood, and individuality is experienced in a male body and so on. But it's another extra bit called a me, right? That is a man. And you look, okay. And you're looking, you really just quiet the mind. And no, it's just silent. There is consciousness, yeah. So you start to really look at that assumption. But it's not a question of believing. So I think really good teaching leads you rather than positions you. That's why I always ask that trick question. Did Buddha teach there's no self? And no. It's like you look into your experience now, okay? And like let's say you're meditating and you find yourself thinking, and you find yourself thinking, and then you say, I'm thinking too much. Well, then stop and say, okay. Well, who is it that's thinking? Again, there's thought, yeah, there's consciousness, but okay, where's this guy that's thinking too much? Let's have a look. And then you stop and you look. find nothing. You find consciousness of change. That's what you find. If you find the little guy, tell me. Take a photo. You won't. Yeah. So that's the point of this teaching. It's not like a position. This is what people get wrong. It's a leading onwards kind of question. And in Advaita Vedanta, in the Chinese tradition, in the Japanese traditions, the Huatou in the Chinese, the who am I? Who is thinking? Or who is feeling this pain is a very provocative question, I would say, in the sense it makes you really look. And if you answer, well, I'm feeling this pain, obviously you're not feeling it. Well, that's not it. It's just more thought. So if you really ask, like, whatever, like, who's feeling this fear? You go to the who, and that's a question which raises awareness to the presence of whatever it is, but it has no answer. Because there is no answer. But you use the question to take you right to that assumption. So that's what this is helping you to do, to see the assumption of self is simply a construct. And then you know, well, who am I? Well, the thinking mind starts to fall away. And then awareness has the capacity to know change. And that becomes an intuition of peace. And you start to follow that intuition rather than the thinking processes that we tend to believe in so much. And this is spiritual work, not conventional kind of life work. And we follow the intuitions of silence quite naturally. And that becomes interesting. And then the sense of identity as mind, body, that more and more of that falls away in a kind of natural process. So, like let's say you go to the market and someone's not wearing a mask, right? And you are adamant that masks must be worn, or vice versa if you're the other, if you're like the other game, whatever. And then you look at the person and you feel annoyance, and then you think, idiot, selfish fool, not wearing a mask. I'm going to tell him something. No, I better not. He's bigger than me. Okay, I won't tell him anything. And you start to grumble in your mind. What's happened is a sense of self has been created, self and other, through aversion, right? And that seems very real, very real. Well, then if you look at that and you have enough mindfulness, so who's angry? And you say, well, there is annoyance, yeah. There's consciousness of annoyance. All you know is there's consciousness of annoyance coming and going. And you say, well, who's really angry here? Yeah, but that idiot, he won't put it in. No. Come back. Come back. And no, it keeps falling away. So that's the investigation we do around this teaching of anatta. It's a provocative question in some ways, isn't it? Because you can't really identify with this mind and body, your own personal history. And on an individual level, that's true. So conventionally, that's true, but there's a deeper reality. So that's what that teaching's meant to do. Kind of provoke you into kind of questioning. And like in Advaita Vedanta, Sri Ramana Maharshi, he used that a lot. Who am I? Very, very powerful kind of phrase to bring out. As long as you don't look for an answer. If you look for an answer, you go crazy. You have to send me an email and sue me or something. It's a question that raises awareness to clear seeing, I would say. One more. Will sustained meditation help? Will sustained meditation help manage feelings of guilt, of constant nagging by the ever-wandering mind that perhaps more could have been done to lessen a sick person's suffering? This feeling seems to become stronger during meditation when the mind is trying to find peace. So that's quite common. Not common, but it's understandable that you want to do your very, very best, and you can't alleviate all the suffering, and you'll make some medical mistakes too, because you're maybe not So I had that with my mom. I had, in the last 4 days of her life, her feet were just a mess. And then I bound up her feet, because we were binding her feet the last year of her life, because the lymph wasn't flowing well. And then I bound it up wrong. And then she was going through a lot of stuff those last 4 days. And I only realized it like 24 hours later. And it was like a kind of a shock to me. Oh gosh, what have you done? I was on my own. And then that memory was very strong. Very, very strong. And so she died. And even though I'd spent 9 years with her doing my utmost best, that was the strongest memory. You know, it was such a horrible, horrible memory. And I talk about this, and I talk to some people, and some people say, oh, Bhante, but you were so good and you helped her. I said, but that wasn't the point. I felt horrible. That was the point. I felt horrible. And then I talked with Ajahn Sucitto. He says, and he had real empathy. He said, oh, that must have been difficult. Oh, thank you. And then sometimes we do that. We kind of don't go to the person suffering and say, oh, but you're fine. You're such a good man. I don't want to hear that. Right? And he said, oh, yeah, that must have been difficult. But anyway, in terms of regret and remorse, then it came to the monastery, and that was a really horrible, horrible memory coming up. I just refused to believe in it. It was very, very horrible in my mind. I was exhausted and confused and so on, but I just kept going. Now, this is a memory. Memory feels this way. And I would just bear with it. And then it'd come up again. It came up like every 10 minutes. And then slowly, but I just refused to take a self-position around it. Because logically I could do that. You know, if I hadn't done anything for a moment, then it'd be more difficult. So at least I had the logic. But the feeling of having done something not enough is very common, isn't it? You find that. Because you always think you could do more. So to feel the memory of loss, I would say, and pain, and not allow that to run into I-making, my-making, that kind of self-thinking, is a discipline. It's not a discipline of repression, it's a discipline of staying with the actual feeling. So, like feelings of guilt or constant nagging, that's all aversion, isn't it? That's all modes of dosa, of aversion. And if you have a facility for actually witnessing your emotions through the heart, and you can, the nagging, the all of that, you can take it to the heart before thought, right? Pre-thinking, pre-verbalizing, and get really good at that. Then when the nagging comes, you just go to your go-to place, the heart, and then you feel the horribleness of that. And that's where aversion comes out. One doesn't want to feel the horribleness of this, so one goes off into self-hatred, and for some reason that seems to be more comfortable. You know, self-flagellation seems, I know that space, so let's hate Viradhammo for a while. Yeah, that felt good. But it's horrible. It's horrible. But actually to stay with the pain in the heart is your whole desire system. I want out of here. I don't want this, anything with this. So I'll go to self-hatred or worry or something like that. So that's what I found with this experience I had with Mom. Just stay with the body. Stay. Yeah, you stupid idiot. How could you? No. Come back. And then it worked its way out. And then the memories became much more realistic about the good times I had with Mom and how lucky I was to take care of her and all the goodness that was around her and all of that. So there's a lot of joy, really. But it was interesting. That was so powerful because it's such a shock. It was such a shock. So the nagging mind, if you try to work all that out with thought, you get really messed up. So don't try to work it out with thought. Work it out with the body. Work it out with the heart and welcome it and say, oh wow, this is painful. And witness it that way, I would say. Will sustained meditation help manage feelings of guilt? Well, how do you meditate? That's the question. Like, do you meditate? Do you think meditation is about not having unpleasant experiences? Is that meditation? Or is that just pacification or something like that? Or meditation as distraction even? But I don't see meditation as managing feelings of guilt. I would see meditation as the liberation of feelings of guilt through full consciousness. It's different. Maybe we mean the same thing, but it's different for me. So like the fears I've experienced, I didn't manage them. I endured them, more like that. And they came through me because they had a life of their own, as it were. And I witnessed them, endured them, felt them, welcomed them in the end, and understood them, which wasn't a management program. It was more like, cleansing, huh? More like that. Constant nagging by the ever-wandering mind that perhaps more could have been done to lessen a sick person's suffering. So like you really make that conscious. Oh, nagging. Okay, where's nagging? You kind of, you label it, don't you? Nagging, right? Oh, shut up, you nagger. That's more aversion. That doesn't work. So you're actually making conscious why the mind is thinking so much as a mood, as an underlying mood. The feeling seems to become stronger during meditation. It's supposed to. Sorry, you get your money back, right? It's supposed to, actually, because you have no distractions. This is the difficulty of meditation. There aren't any escape routes, right? You just have your own mind, and you can escape. Yeah, you can watch Netflix and so on, and have a whiskey and soda or whatever people do. But it's gonna haunt you. So if it comes up, okay, this is my chance. This is my chance. And then the courage is to realize that the courage comes from realizing this will change. And this is not injurious, actually. It's difficult, but it's not injurious. And this will change. This is nature. Nature feels this way. So any kind of meditation where you are able to understand witnessing as opposed to fixing. Understand witnessing as opposed to sorting out or solving or analyzing. Understand witnessing to change of nature. All that's going to serve you well in these upheavals. And they are difficult, yeah. So you want people that can help you to say it's okay, right? Rather than say, well, you go, do something different. Well, yeah, you can do something different. That's okay, but when it's there, sometimes it's really very important to be with it. So meditation, like Ajahn Viradhammo, he used to say that some of this kind of meditation, not always, this kind of meditation is an emotional enema. Now there's a pretty picture, isn't it? You think about that, huh? Now sometimes it's really blissful and peaceful, and we think, well, meditation is blissful and peaceful. No, sometimes it's purification. Some of like the stories of Ajahn Chah, the kind of lustful experience. He had a very lustful mind. And he'd go days with incredible lust coming through his consciousness. Not fun at all, but he just endured and watched. So don't, be encouraged that this is not, there's nothing wrong with this. It's the skill to understand actually how to make it conscious and know it as a part of your karma, as a part of your life. And find people that encourage you in that way, I'd say.